I would thank you very much, Mr. Salazar. I would like to next introduce our next speaker, John Carr. We've invited John. John is a legend in Catholic social justice circles, having previously served as the director of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, Department of Justice, Peace, and Human Development. Is that the right title for you?
Very modest.
And now teaching at Georgetown and running an initiative on Catholic social thought and public life. So John is going to offer us some reflections on Catholic social teaching on labor and work in light of what we've just heard from Mr. Salazar.
Well, thank you. Before I talk about the topic, let me just say something about KI. A lot of talk at Georgetown about mission, about Catholic mission, about what a university ought to be about. I'm proud to be on the same hallway with these folks. They take these lofty principles and ideas and put them to work, not only at this university, but in this city, in the labor movement, in the church. And it is amazing with a little bit of resources and a lot of courage and a lot of integrity what they have done. And I was sitting here thinking that, you know, I've done lots of things. I worked for the Bishops' Conference for 25 years. No time in purgatory for me. I now run this initiative, and some of the work we've done has been around economic justice, the rights of workers. We're doing a session on Monday around the life and work of Dorothy Day, a new film, champion of unions. But I also teach. I teach a seminar on Catholic social thought, public life, and Pope Francis. And it's terrific, except for grading. Georgetown students, many of them think an A- is a major defeat. A young guy came to see me and said, "How come I got a B+ on my paper?" And I said, "Because I'm a very generous grader." And he didn't think that was funny. But they're wonderful. These students, they come from every walk of life. We were having a discussion in our class around immigration and Catholic social teaching, and the professor was holding forth, and students were holding forth, more conservative, more liberal, more activist. There was a young guy in the class, when I met him, said, "Tell me about your mother, your family." He said, "Well, I don't know my dad. My mother cleans other people's houses, and I call her every night to see if she made it home, because she's undocumented. She does not have Jesus fighting for her. She is vulnerable in a way that most of us cannot even imagine." In that class, I talk about Rerum Novarum, what the new things were then, and why the church supports work and workers. The core, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir, the core of Catholic social teaching is human dignity. But the most clear expression of that teaching is around work, the dignity of work and the rights of workers. There's a lot more in papal teaching about work and workers than there is about aspects of human sexuality. But you wouldn't know that from the obsessions that guide some of our friends, frankly, on both the left and the right. So I try and talk to them about what human dignity is, and that it's not something you earn, it's something you have. I had to bring Jesus in to talk about what dignity is like. I came here with nothing, and now this is what we have accomplished. I try and teach them what solidarity is. And I have Jesus come in and say, "You know what, I was doing better, but I had to fight for my co-workers," which I think is a direct quote. That's what solidarity is. I try and teach them about the family life and healthcare and vacation and benefits as something that belongs to people in order to respect their dignity. And I should have brought in the contract that Jesus fought for. There are lots of ways to think about this. I mostly think about encyclicals. What we just heard was a walking, talking encyclical. This is our tradition at work. This is the gospel in action. And whether it's explicitly religious, although Jesus talked about how he puts together his faith and the struggle for justice. Not all of us do, but one of the things about Pope Francis, and he's obviously in a long line. You go Leo the 13th, you know, Pius the 11th, John the 23rd. I mean, I have footnotes, you have footnotes for all these things. Pope John Paul II, who a lot of conservatives champion, was a champion of workers and the rights of workers. It was not the AFL-CIO that said unions were indispensable. It was John Paul II. It was not a bunch of politicians who brought down communism in Poland. It was a pope and a union and a word, solidarity, without a pane of glass being broken. I mean, people like to talk about nonviolence. We'll talk about nonviolence with Dorothy Day next Monday. The most remarkable nonviolent revolution in our time was solidarity, like Valenza, a union, a ship workers union, and a pope. So we forget that this is part of our tradition. Pope Francis is absolutely a champion of workers and champion of human dignity. He has a great line. He says, "There's no good society without a good union." And it's great that you have built a good union, because that's contributing to a decent society. But Pope Francis is not much for words. He's more about actions. He more often shows us the way. So he looks at the world, at the economy, at work, from the bottom up and from the outside in. And frankly, the church and the labor movement and Georgetown, three institutions I love, would do a lot better if they looked at their mission from the bottom up and from the outside in. So to have an example, a person who is putting these ideas into action in a way that you can measure from 416 to 1610. Don't let professors find out you can get your birthday off. This is going to be a problem if that gets around. And it was not only what you achieved, but how it came about. One of my favorite ideas about unions, it's not that they help people have more, it's that they help people be more. We heard the pride, we heard the urgency, we heard the courage, we heard the tenacity. So to have a voice, he said, in our place, to be able to stand up for what we believe, to be able to defend other workers, to be able to have a grievance day. So if somebody treats you badly, this is our tradition in action. And I'm sad to say, in that class, wonderful students, they know a lot about the option for the poor, they know something about immigration, they even may know something about the church's commitment to peace, they certainly know about the church's commitment to human life. They don't know much about what our tradition has to say about work and workers. And that's on all of us. That's on the church, that's on the labor movement, that's on professors, and that's on the families that raise these students. We did one of our dialogues on this topic of economics and family life. And we had the president of the AFL-CIO, Rich Trumka, I think a distinguished leader, great person. We had an economist for the American Enterprise Institute, Michael Strain, good guy, a conservative voice for workers, for families. We had a theologian who talked about these ideas in ways that enlightened you and moved you. And then we had a young woman, I should have remembered her name and looked up her name, who was a cafeteria worker here at Georgia. Georgetown. And she told the story of working at Leo's. I don't even know if it was called Leo's then, working at the cafeteria. And she had epilepsy. And she had a seizure. And she went over to the hospital and she called in and said, I can't come back to work. I've had a spell. And whoever her boss was says, you know, this happens too much. I don't think we can keep you on. And she went home, she recovered, she went to work the next day. And this is her story, as she told it. She said, as a student was coming through the line, she saw that she was down. And said, what's wrong? She said, I had a spell yesterday, and they told me they're probably going to fire me. And I don't know what I'm going to do. I have 2 boys. I just don't know what I'm going to do. And the student, nameless, said, well, what are you going to do about that? And she said, I don't think there's anything I can do. And the student said, you know, if you will stand up for yourself, I'll stand with you. And we'll get others to stand with you. And she said, and we got students, and we got professors, and we got Jesuits. And she said, that was the beginning of the union for food workers here at Georgetown. And she said, my kids, one's a sophomore in college, one's a senior in high school and he's going to college. And Georgetown, that job, and that union put me in a position. And then she became an organizer to continue that work. Well, I would argue in our tradition, that's not an economic profession, that's not a political option, that's not a reflection of ideology. That's a defense of human dignity. And for us, that's holy work. That's the work of the church. And so I think that's what drives Georgetown. I mean, not every campus has been open to adjuncts organizing. There have been other struggles on this campus, but it's up to workers to decide that they'll have a voice in the union. They'll be represented in the workplace. They'll have a representative to bargain with them and for them. It's not up to managers, it's not up to bishops, it's not up to the rest of us. It's up to them to decide. And sometimes they decide yes, sometimes they decide no, and we ought to respect that. That's their choice. But when they decide yes, we ought to see that as reflecting the best of American values and the best of our religious tradition. Pope Francis, while John Paul II was the champion of solidarity and really put it to work, Pope Francis loves solidarity and gets to. One of my favorite stories about him, I'm stalling until our work. One of my favorite stories about Pope Francis is, you may recall when he first was made Pope, he had a meeting with the Curia at Christmas, and it's a great tradition that, you know, have this party and you tell everyone how wonderful they are. And Francis, who apparently never took a business administration course, met with the Curia and said, here are the 10 things you're doing wrong, the way you're undermining the church. One of them I remember was spiritual amnesia. The other was you forget who works for who, with humility and all. He just laid the law out, and it was not a great Christmas for the Curia. And then he left and he went to the Christmas party for the workers, the gardeners, the cooks, the janitors, the custodians. And he just seemed so much more at home with them. We need a church that is more at home with janitors and cooks and people who fix our food when we go on an airplane. Pope Francis, says it frequently, but he says solidarity is at the heart of the church's teaching. He says for some it's a dirty word, but it's our word. Solidarity is what Jesus taught us about. solidarity is what we ought to be about. And solidarity is in many ways the missing mission in the United States and in our church and in our community. So, thank you. I want you to come to my class.